Welcome to the Acvia Zoom number 14 for 2023, and thank you so much for being here this morning. I'm Carol Sullivan, your facilitator, with Cindy Madigan, who's the co-host. If you could please rename yourself with your city, your county, or your league, then we can see where everybody's coming from, and that's just great. You could also add your Indigenous lands information in the chat, so we're reminded of and can honor those whose land we now live on, work, and play on. So in the reminder email that I sent out this morning, there was a link, and hopefully it looks like it didn't get people signing in as Carol Sullivan. So yay, that's wonderful. There were also links to the recording for the tree campaign that Kate Lunsford brought to us a couple of weeks ago, and last week's presentation by Cynthia Stewart on housing and homelessness, which was really excellent. I'm going to go back and watch it again myself because so much good information. And also there's a link to the Clean Energy Future from March 28, which was electrify everything in our homes. You'll also find a link to that in the early part of the chat. Next week, I'm hoping, because my invitation was really late, that members of the lobby team will be here to share what we'll need doing in the final days of the legislative session. You may have noticed there wasn't too much to do from the legislative newsletter the last couple of weeks, but that's going to all change very quickly. And then there are going to be lots of action, mostly in asking our senators and representatives to vote for a certain bill or urge it be brought up for a vote, I guess in the reverse order. April 17th, then we're going to have as our guests the members from the Decline in Local News Study Group, who will share their study and their findings. And their study really has huge implications for our democracy. And it's very important that we pay attention to this, news. We listen to it every day. We need to pay attention to what's happening to local news and the impacts. And then April 24th, yay, that's going to be our legislative wrap up. The successes that we've had, what might come back in the next session and what might not. Some things are going to die. So with that, Cindy, did you want to show people how to log in, or should we save that for last? It's up to you.
I think we can save it for last because it looks like everybody here has got it figured out. Yeah.
Okay, and let me introduce you to Betty Carteret. She's going to explain to us the benefits to us and other Americans that we'll get from the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, which is just huge. Maybe not the benefits, but it's a huge, big bill. So Betty originated in Virginia, and her first degree was in Asian Studies from UVA. It seems like she took another turn and later got a degree in mechanical engineering from WSU. Then she put that degree to good use at the Hanford Nuclear Facility in Eastern Washington, where she worked on designing new equipment that was to reduce worker exposure, I'm presuming, to bad things, and to clean out waste tanks. And then, she got to put her designs into use at the facility. But she's retired now, and she's putting her energy into volunteer work. Again, I say yay, because so much happens when we turn to what we really, our passion really is. And she's offering climate change classes and presentations since 2007. She led the installation of community gardens in Anacortes, helped with founding Friends of Skagit Beaches, being a Salish sea steward, try saying that 3 times fast, promoting citizen awareness of plastic pollution by founding the Skagit Plastic Reduction and Recycling Coalition, SPARC, sort of, where I first met Betty, and in most recently founding and heading the Skagit chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. And CCL is a grassroots organization that exists to create the political will for a livable world. Its approach to climate action is nonpartisan, and it's aimed at working with our elected officials to communicate our shared experiences, desire for a livable world, and the need for urgent and substantial action on climate change. She lives in Anacortes. Many of you know her, and with her husband, Eric, and they have a son and daughter-in-law in Houston. that's it. Take it away, Betty. Let's
Thank you
transition.
very much, Carol. Thank you so much. And it was such a pleasure working with Carol, and still is. So we miss her since she left Skagit County. I am so pleased to be back again. I think a year or so I came and talked to you about carbon pricing, if you recall that talk. But putting a price on carbon is still a primary target of work for the Citizens Climate Lobby. But since the passage of the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, Citizens Climate Lobby, Citizens Climate Education, which is actually the part of the group that I'm representing, is expanded their focus to 4 primary areas, continuing to work on pushing to get a price on carbon, also working on electrification, and particularly in the area of building efficiency and electrification. And the third area is regulatory reform, permitting reform, which is critically needed for us to proceed forward with the transition to clean energy. And lastly, an initiative on healthy forests, which I think also encompasses some initiatives related to agriculture as a key area where carbon sequestration can be accomplished. So we've expanded our mission, but we are still working on carbon pricing. So let's get started here. The idea of getting clean energy in our future isn't new. Actually, in 1931, Thomas Edison told his close friends, Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone, "I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that." Well, of course, we haven't run out of oil and coal, but we have run out of our ability for our environment to absorb its byproducts. So, this is an idea that's not new. But it's taken us almost 100 years to get serious about it. And speaking about getting serious about it, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, of course, has just come out with a new report, which is unequivocal in stating that we are at an inflection point where we must take action on reducing greenhouse gases, making deep cuts to get our emissions down if we are to retain a livable world. And it's really critical. We are at the point where we must take action, or we will be moving beyond the point where we can still to have a livable world for primarily our children and grandchildren in the future. And we're already seeing a lot of the impacts of the climate changing. We're seeing all these horrible tornadoes in the Midwest right now and whatnot. Those sorts of things are just going to continue to get worse as time goes on. So it is a bad story. It's not good news, but the good thing is we are not beyond the point of no return yet. There are some reasons for us to still be hopeful. And one of those, around the world, we're seeing more and more news about climate change. People are very concerned about it. One of the things that gives me hope, the Yale University Climate Change Communication and George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication have been doing this Six Americas study since 2008. And this diagram here is data from their 2021 report. And what it does is they have been doing a survey of Americans since 2008 and divided people up into these 6 categories, where they're a lower belief or a higher belief in global warming, whether they're motivated and concerned. And back in 2008, you could have almost swapped this around 180 degrees. There were a lot bigger circles on the lowest belief end, but now the largest circle is people who are alarmed about climate change. People are paying attention, people are concerned about it, and people are wanting action to happen. So 75%, in fact, of the Americans, based on the results of this study, are now worried about climate change at some level and are really wanting actions to happen. I have a couple of sort of climate heroes, one of them being Dr. Hansen from the NASA, James Hansen from the NASA Goddard Space Center, who for decades warned us about climate change and that we really needed to get going. And I'm hoping he's feeling that people are finally listening to him. But another one is a fellow by the name of Saul Griffith. He's a certified genius, winner of a MacArthur Genius Grant Award, engineer and inventor. Back in 2017, he was hired by the United States Department of Energy to do a high resolution study of the US energy system to basically analyze where the energy is coming from, where the energy is going to, down to what they called a 0.1% point fidelity level. And this is something that had never been done before. And he was able to complete this analysis and map out the US energy sector. And what he found as a result of that, and in his recommendations, he's written a book called Electrify, an Optimist Playbook for the Clean Energy Future, which is a bit of a difficult read because it's, written by an engineer, but it's a really compelling book talks about how really the solution before us exists right now. We have 80% of what we need in hand right now. And what we really need to do is to clean up our energy supply and go all electric for a healthier environment. So this is sort of his playbook for his pathway to move forward on this, to plan to combat climate change. He has an organization called rewiringamerica.org. They have a tremendous amount of great resources on their website for people, and we'll talk about a few more of those. So in the background of this here, I don't really want you to, I just put it there for graphic purposes mainly, but this is what's called a Sankey diagram. And this is a tool that he used to map out the US energy system. On the left, we have the sources of energy and all these different lines going through to different sectors that use it. And on the right, basically where it is being used in the end. And throughout here, you have both uses and waste. And he basically found that when you do an accounting of our energy system, the supply side on the left, and where it goes, the demand side on the right, we can see that in order to decarbonize our economy, we must electrify approximately 1 billion machines. When we say 1 billion machines, we mean our washer and dryer, our stove cooktop, our heating system in our home, and all those other machines throughout our homes and businesses. We need to transition away from fossil fuel-based machines to electrically supplied and driven machines. And the other thing that was revealed by this study is there is a tremendous amount of waste in a system based on fossil fuels. And we all intuitively know that. When we drive our car and we come home, we park our car, we put our hand on the hood of the car, it's hot. And all of that is waste heat, wasted energy. And basically, fossil fuels are a wasteful type of energy provider. by nature, whereas electrification doesn't have that kind of waste built into it. So there's a lot of compelling reasons for us to move towards an all-electric future. So some of his conclusions were that basically we can't efficiency ourselves to net zero being that we are have reduced our emissions to the point where either there are near very low amounts of emissions of carbon dioxide, and those that are being emitted are being dealt with through sequestration. And so that we have a net zero sum there. And we talked about the wasteful nature of fossil fuels, and we can eliminate 90% of this waste and reduce climate change at the same time by going all electric. He also found that we need to completely revamp our energy system. We need to decarbonize electric production and modernize our electric grid. And then again, talking about electrification of those 1 billion machines in over 121 million households in the US. The other thing he concluded is this is quite feasible. We have 80% of what we need to do the job right now. You know, there are things we need to start working on and develop more technologies, but it's not like we've got to wait until we develop a bunch of new technologies. We have in hand what we need to get about 80% of the job done right now. And in doing that, we'll create millions of new jobs, a healthier economy. People will save money and will create a more economically just situation in this transition. But it's going to be a heavy lift. This is going to require a wartime effort, a World War II type of commitment and total public buy-in to make this happen. And we all have a role to play in making that happen. The other part of the story he tells is that this is not a story of deprivation. You know, you think back, since the days of Jimmy Carter, talked about, oh, we've got to cut back, be more efficient. And those are all great things. And it's a good thing we've done them, because we would be in a worse position now if we hadn't. But that electrification is really a story of shared abundance, where it's going to have economic benefits for everyone. We're going to rebuild American industries and create a lot of good jobs. We're going to have environmental and climate justice, cleaner air for everyone, warmer, more efficient and affordable homes. And we're going to have a safer world, which means no more wars over fossil fuels, because we're going to be producing this renewable electric power right here at home. And so this is really a good story. It's not a story of, oh, we're going to deprive ourselves of anything. We're going to have an abundant future. So organizations around the world right now are basically adopting this message. The International Energy Agency put out a report called Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for global energy sector. And on the right, it basically shows different components of how we get to net zero. And you'll see, you know, we're not going to go through this, but things like no new oil and gas fields approved, buildings being zero carbon ready, no new internal combustion energy car sales in 2035 and things like that. So they've also laid out a roadmap that is very similar to the types of things that Saul Griffith is talking about here also, that lays out a plan for how to make this happen by 2050, the net zero transition. This is an interesting diagram. Now, in the early chat, I had put a link to a resource page that I created to go with this. And Cindy, if you wouldn't mind reposting that. because I know this is really impossible to see, but I have links to like the IAEA report and some of Saul Griffith's information, as well as the source of this graphic if you wanted to go back and look at it at a later time. But what this basically shows is countries who are committed, making commitments in terms of going net zero. And the different colors here on the left, you see white, those are Suriname and Bhutan, I believe it is. Yeah, who have already achieved net zero. And then other countries who've committed in 2020 through 2050 here in the smaller bars, but you can see the largest light blue bar across the top is 2050. Most countries that are participating in this are committing to net zero by 2050. And there's a lot of them, but there are a few laggards out there on the right-hand side. You'll see that Singapore and Australia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, China are all way behind, and Russia is completely absent from the diagram. So they've made no commitments at all. So in the little box here in the middle of your screen, there's different kinds of commitments these nations have made. Either they have are currently discussing something, sort of the lighter polka dot blue area. There's proposed legislation, striped areas, and then policies and development and laws there. So there's different levels of commitment, but at some level, these countries have all committed to a net zero future. And so this is interesting to look at. If you can go click on the link in that document and look at it a little deeper. So in, I think it was 2020 or so, the US government asked the National Academy of Sciences to study and provide recommendations on how to accelerate decarbonization of the US energy system. And they came out with this consensus study report in 2021, I believe it is. And what they concluded is that its net zero policy is more than non-emitting energy technologies. It impacts other issues that people care about deeply, both technical issues as well as socioeconomic issues. And it provides an opportunity to, one, provide a more sustainable and healthier future, strengthen our economy and increase high quality jobs in the US, build a net zero carbon energy system without today's social injustices, and enable businesses and individuals to share equitably in this new energy system. So the National Academy has a lot of detailed recommendations on that, and I provided a link to this report also for you. So based on this information from the National Academy, as well as Saul Griffith and others, the US, under the Biden administration, developed a long-term strategy for the United States, which is a pathway to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And it laid out the goal, and you will all probably remember this announcement that came out, that we are going to achieve 50% reduction of our emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. 2030, that's 7 years from now. This is a heavy lift. This is a lot to be done, and it's going to require us all to be in completely on this happening. So this is the report the administration put out. Again, I provided a link to that, and this is just a diagram that kind of shows how this reduction will be achieved over time. And what's really good news is we don't just have a report and a document, but Congress passed legislation that puts money where our mouth is. Basically, they have funded this effort to reach net zero at a level of $509 billion that are coming through the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill that are paying for work towards climate change action here. So this is a diagram from the New York Times that sort of shows the different types of areas, but probably more instructive is this diagram of where is this $509 billion being spent. The largest fraction of it, $281 billion, is being spent on clean energy transition. 70 billion on resilience, 59 on manufacturing, 47 on EVs and clean fuels, etc. So this is how that $509 billion pie is being cut up to provide funding to move us towards that 2050 goal of achieving net zero emissions. As we go along, if you think of any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll come back and discuss those. So back to Saul Griffith again. I talked about his book, Electrify Everything, but he's written a much more accessible article that sort of goes through the same information called 1 Billion Machines Decarbonization Demystified. That's much shorter, more easy to digest, and I provided a link to that report on the resource sheet for you. And basically his point is we need to decarbonize the grid and electrify everything. That is the solution that will get us most of the way there. And CCL says what gets us the rest of the way is putting a price on carbon. So those two things can be a very powerful combination. So what do we mean by decarbonize the grid? What we mean is we are going to decarbonize our source of energy supply, basically go to zero carbon sources of electrical power production. Wind and solar, of course, are the obvious ones, but then we also have, if those cannot provide, enough, there's of course existing hydropower stations. There's not a lot of resource available to expand hydropower, but then there's also a wealth of geothermal potential for energy creation using geothermal. And there's always nuclear, which is a non-carbon source of electricity, a controversial one, but that is one that does produce no carbon. And one of the recommendations that's come forward is that we continue to operate our existing nuclear power plants, and as long as they can be safely operated in order to facilitate our transition into the clean energy future. The other thing we're going to need, because of course wind and solar are variable in terms of their production, wind's not always blowing, the sun's not always shining, is we need the capability to store renewable power. And there's, of course, batteries is one big storage option, but then there's a number of other renewable storage options that are being looked at. Things like pumped hydro in the picture on the right, where this is a dam on the Columbia River, and it's just an illustration showing that when wind and solar are operating and they have excess power, we would pump water from the lower reservoir to the upper reservoir. And then when we need more power, we can reverse that and run that water through a turbine, like a dam, just like a dam, and produce power going back down again. And you can just repeat that cycle as a way to store power. And there are many other options being looked at here, but that is one area where we need to really grow our capacity to store renewable power. We, of course, need to modernize our electric grid, and we did have a talk on that as part of our series back in February, and that document called Mark Your Calendar that I put a link to. There is a link to watch the video on that presentation if you're interested. And basically, you know, our electric grid is a marvel of engineering, but it was built many decades ago, and it was built for a fossil fuel based energy supply system where we have discrete large power plants located in various locations, and we're sending the power from those. But in the clean energy future, the power sources are going to be much more distributed, and we're going to need smarter technologies and a different type of grid to meet the challenges ahead. So this is a big thing that needs to happen. The other thing is we need to work on community resilience, where we have more locally based power options, things like utility co-ops, community solar programs, where we've got some localized energy production sources, even on our own rooftops there. So this is sort of all part of what we may call decarbonizing the grid. So when we talk about electrifying, it's got so many benefits. We're going to clean up our electric supply, get rid of those gas and coal-fired power plants, electrify our homes, have cleaner power in our homes, have less bills. We're going to electrify our transportation, and everybody's going to participate in this. So when we talk about electrifying our homes, and this is the talk we just had last Tuesday with Brian Stewart, and you've reposted that, and I highly recommend his talk. And I know Carol and maybe some others of you went to that talk. It was excellent. And we are talking about replacing those fossil fuel-based systems in our home, particularly our furnaces. Probably a lot of people have gas-fired furnaces. Maybe some people still have fuel oil, but gas is the predominant one now, as well as gas-fired water heaters, gas-fired cooktops. We're talking about replacing all of those with existing high efficiency, low cost electric alternatives. So this doesn't mean we all have to necessarily run out tomorrow and replace everything in our home, but as things begin to get to the point where they are reaching end of life, or there are other issues related to them and you're considering replacing them, we need to choose the electric alternative. We don't have time for people to buy one more gas furnace. Everybody has to be in. Our next furnace needs to be a heat pump, an electric heat pump, to heat our homes. You know, we just in the last week put in some heat pump, what's called mini splits, which are in the wall of our house here. And so we have a gas furnace, but we're converting to the electric mini splits. And my plan is to convert my gas range to an induction range within the next year. So we all need to start planning our own personal electrification journey of going from fossil fuel based machines, as Saul Griffith calls them, to all electric machines in our home. And Rewiring America provides a lot of resources to help you do that. They have a guidebook called Electrify Everything in Your Home that talks about all the different systems and what it takes to do that. They give some costs, but I'd caution that the costs in their book are probably low compared to today's numbers. Since the dawn of inflation, prices are quite a bit higher, I think, than what they quote in this book, but it still gives you the methodologies and things you need to consider there. And so I've also got a link to that in the resource sheet. So on Electrify America's, Rewiring America's website, they also have a guidebook to what people can what benefits are available to people from the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of tax credits and rebates, upfront rebates or price reductions. And so this Go Electric Now guidebook is available to download on their website. And they have a thing called the Inflation Reduction Act calculator. So the Inflation Reduction Act provides two types of benefits to people. And the type of benefit you're eligible for depends on your income. And it's based on the median income, the official median income of the area you live in, and what percentage range you fit in, whether you're classified as high, medium, or low income. And of course, the lower tiered folks in the income spectrum get a lot higher benefits than people with medium. And in the high income brackets, you're only eligible for tax credits, not for any of the upfront rebates. And so I played around with the calculator and say here in Skagit County, the cutoff for what would be considered high income for, say, a two-person household would be about $104,000 a year. And if you make $104,000 or more, a two-person household, then you would only be eligible for tax credits, not any of the upfront rebates or reductions in price there. So this calculator is great. You can all go to their website on the resource sheet again. And here's what you'll see when you go to the calculator. You'll put in just a few basic pieces of information here: your zip code, your status, whether you're a homeowner, what your household income is, your tax filing, and what your household size is. Put in those 5 pieces of information, hit calculate, and it will run, and then it'll tell you that this family of 4 in Mount Vernon making $80,000 a year is eligible for annually $14,000 of upfront discounts, covers up to 50% of the costs for things that are covered. And we're going to look at that in just a second. They're also eligible for $5,850 in tax credits for work that is covered under the inflation. And that's estimated that they will save $1,400 a year in energy by doing the various types of things that can be done. So total incentives, almost $20,000 per year for this family in Mount Vernon. So when you then look further at the details of this, the top list here are the upfront discounts and rebates that you would be eligible for. Now you'll see there it says timeline late 2023. The federal government, these will be rolled out at the state level, and the federal government is currently in the process of negotiating with states on how this will be rolled out. And so it's not yet set up. It says late 2023, but I haven't heard a definitive date when this will become available. However, the tax credits are available now. So you can see here in terms of the rebates, you could get up to $4,000 if you replace your electrical panel. So a number of things you might do in your home, putting in a heat pump or a new induction range and things like that, may require that you upgrade your electrical panel to provide a higher level of service there. And if you do that, then you can get up to a $4,000. This family in Mount Vernon, this is specific to the family in Mount Vernon, the fictitious family I created. They can get up to $4,000 for that. If they put in an electric cooktop, they can get $840, wiring, heat pump water heater, heat pump air conditioner, heat pump clothes dryer, weatherization of your home, and efficiency rebates up to 4,000 there. So you can see what's available, and you can each do this and it'll create your own personal calculation there. So in terms of tax credits, of course, you can get battery storage installation. Now this would be for battery backup. In the case of say if you have electric solar panels on your roof, you can store energy in your battery system. And then if there's a power outage or whatever, you've got your battery system as a backup. You can get up to 30% tax credit on the cost of that. For a geothermal heating installation, up to 30%. Again, a tax credit of $600 for electrical panel. Electric vehicle charger, $1,000, new electric vehicle, $75, and used electric vehicle, $4,000. Heat pump, air conditioner, heater, $2,000. Now, you see to the right there, there's that tab that says more information. It's important that you click on that because it will bring up a detailed page about that particular item. And for instance, in the electric vehicles, there are some restrictions on the types of electric vehicles that qualify for these tax credits. So as you're looking at this, you're definitely going to want to click that more information tab there and read the details and the caveats as to, you know, things that are required or restricted or whatever. So this is a super easy thing to do, and it'll give you a good picture of what you personally can qualify for under the Inflation Reduction Act. So kind of to summarize what we've just been talking about is by going with renewable energy and electrification, we can live in a home that's safer and more comfortable. We've heard a lot recently about the health impacts of gas appliances in our homes. We can spend our energy dollars on the solution rather than the problem. Get our dollars out of buying fossil fuels and pay for electric solutions. We can also help to make these critical solutions part of the new normal. Those of us who can afford to be early adopters, we need to do it so that our neighbors say, oh, well, Betty and Eric just installed heat pump mini splits. Maybe we should think about doing that. So those of us who can, should do this just to get the ball rolling, because a lot of people, it's definitely financially challenging, and some people are just going to be resistant to change. But by being early adopters, we can influence and get that ball rolling. So really, we can do this. It's going to be a tremendously difficult, heavy lift of a job. 2030 is 7 years from now, and 2050 is what, 27 years from now? Is that right? Yes. That is just a snap. I mean, each year goes by so fast. And so we really are going to have to pull together on this. And the secret to making progress is to just get started, as Mark Twain said. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to now go on and take your questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Betty. I really appreciate it. Just lots of good information there. I'm going to start kind of at the top, and Tiffany, right from the beginning, asked if you could put the quote in the chat, and I think she means Tiffany, I'm looking at you right now. I think you mean the quote with Thomas Edison and Harry Firestone.
Okay.
That was great. It really was, you know, because it kind of does make the point that this is not new and that people have had this thought for so long. We're just very late to be getting into this.
There you go.
And thank you. Too. Yeah. And Virginia asked if her natural gas fireplace is part of the problem. And I think we answered in chat, but do you want to confirm it for everybody?
It is part of the problem. It's not as big of a problem, probably. It depends, you know, it is part of the problem.
Yeah.
The amount of problem depends on how much you use it, of course. And so if you have that and you use it all the time as your primary source of heat or whatever, then you are burning fossil fuels, you are, emitting carbon emissions by using that. So the answer is yes, it's probably not as big as a gas furnace, but it is part of the problem.
And then Virginia also asked, doesn't global shipping also contribute carbon to our climate? Won't we need batteries to power them? And lithium is already in high demand. So I never even thought about shipping. Of course you have to get things across the ocean.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those are primarily, I think, run on diesel and whatnot. So yes, that is an issue. I think in terms of, I can't speak to the percentage of emissions that come from global shipping, but that's one reason why, the big answer, or the Biden administration and part of the infrastructure bills and whatnot are pushing towards funding, rejuvenating our energy, our manufacturing systems in the US so that we can get these things done here at home without having to ship everything from other countries. We are still going to need components from abroad. We're not going to get away from that. But there's no free lunch in this solution. Okay, nothing is going to be perfect here. We just have to kind of look at what is the risk and the benefit of each of our solutions. And overall, we're going to have to make some compromises in order to get the most benefit with the lowest risk here. And so I think, the whole push in the legislation to basically put the money into businesses in the US doing this work, establishing battery plants here in the US, establishing mineral production in the US and things like that, is trying to get at and address some of those issues, as well as rebuilding our economy at the same time. And I can't remember the second part of that question, but if there's more, let me know.
No, it was just about lithium being high in demand because
it is high in demand. There is a lot of work going into looking at alternative production methodologies. Right now, one of the things that's being looked at very seriously and developed is areas that have high geothermal activity, such as in the Salton Sea in California. California is investing in a big production capability because these geothermal springs and whatnot, the solutions, hot solutions that come up from those are fairly rich in lithium. And so California is building lithium extraction capabilities there and wants to be a major production source for producing lithium by extracting it from geothermal liquids there, which are abundant in the Salton Sea region of California. And there's other areas around the country here. So there is a lot of emphasis looking at alternative ways to get it rather than just mining. Secondly, there's also technology development going on looking at alternatives to lithium. The Chinese have just introduced a new electric vehicle that runs on a sodium aluminum battery, not a lithium battery. And this is something I retired from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory over in the Tri-Cities. And they have a research program going on there right now looking at developing these sodium battery technologies. And of course, sodium is just abundantly available and whatnot. So, it's like everything. As time goes on, new ways of doing things come along. You think about, well, we used to go to the movie theater to watch movies. We'd have to go out and go into the movie theater. And then there was really revolutionary, and people could watch beta tapes at their homes, tapes or reel-to-reel tapes of movies at their home, and then beta tapes, and then then CDs and DVDs. And it's sort of that same thing, is we are dependent on lithium batteries now. As time goes on, I think we'll see more and more new types of capabilities come to the forefront. We just need to get started now using what we have and develop the alternatives.
I see Jim has it. Thank you, Betty. I think here's somebody we were talking about this, a generational change that kids today don't know that this technology really works to seal a bag. It doesn't have to be Ziploc. They think it's always has been Ziploc. And Jim has his hand up, and I bet he's going to talk about using household garbage for generation of electricity. Go ahead, Jim.
Yes, I guess I'm ready to go. I'm sorry. We all have a lot of household garbage, and there's an industrial garbage that is carbon-based garbage that exceeds the amount of household garbage. And waste management dumps it into ravines in Oregon or wherever they are, and they pack it down and pack it down and pack it down, and it creates methane gas. Unfortunately, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for the counties to transport that garbage by rail car to these places, and it's a resource because it is non-fossil fuel. It is not fossil fuel because it comes from plants and mostly plants, trees, paper, rubber, plastic. The plastic comes from fossil fuel, but paper and rubber and all of these other carbonaceous materials do not come from fossil fuel. So using them by burning them, actually by using a depolymerization process and cooking them, and then refining the slurry that you get from that, the same way that you refine fossil fuel, would hopefully be able to manufacture gasoline and natural gas and diesel fuel and bunker fuel for the ships at sea. If we're worried that the ships at sea aren't going to be able to travel, why they would have bunker fuel that would come from non-fossil fuel source. I have never heard or seen any official document or any organization talk about doing anything with all of this carbonaceous material that will be the final ending of the world, because everybody is going to have household garbage or industrial garbage that will be harmful. So what say you?
I think that there certainly is some. I don't think right now there's a lot of work going into harvesting garbage for biofuels, but I think there is work starting to look at biofuels using materials that are basically, when they decompose or whatever, would be releasing carbon dioxide and or methane into the environment. and creating biofuels out of those. And I think one area in particular where this is of high interest is in the airline, air jet fuel, in other words. And I think that you're right, that this is a huge source. And I think that eventually we're going to get to the point where when we are no longer pumping, it's way cheaper right now just to pump fossil fuels out of the ground than it would be to convert these carbon-rich garbage supplies into biofuels. But
why
once,
wait?
yeah,
Why-
so
why
once
why wait until we run out of fossil
absolutely.
fuel to so nobody is talking about it?
Well, yeah, I would say not nobody, but I don't think it's a priority for people. But I think that for one thing, I know that Rick Larson proposed some sort of a alternative biofuels bill related to airplane fuels and whatnot. So I think that as we phase out fossil fuels and we hopefully put a price on them where they become more expensive, then recycling materials from our landfills will become more and more attractive as an alternative for particularly air transportation is probably the biggest challenge in terms of getting away from using burning fossil fuels is in air transportation. So I would encourage you to send Rick Larson some communications about this. I think that's an area he's interested in, and let him know what you're thinking about. I think also, it would be good to search online, because I bet there are some early initiatives looking at this, and I don't think they're currently probably doing a lot, but I think as we phase out fossil fuels, this sort of thing is going to become something people start looking at seriously. So I think it's a great idea.
Thanks, Jim, for
Thank
bringing it
you.
up.
Thank you.
Pat, I see your hand up, but I think I'd like to go to a couple of other questions, unless it deals exactly with this, or because there are some questions in the chat before your hand. And one of them was Judy. Let's see, we're not going to find Judy. Although I know that Chris commented on something with the acronym or the initials MEER, mirrors. And I can't find it now.
It's mirrors for energy, or sorry, for Earth's energy rebalancing. So it's called the MIR initiative. And I was wondering, Betty, if you've heard of that.
No, I haven't heard of that.
He put a link in the chat.
I put a link. It's a worldwide effort to try to address the heat gain of the planet by using mirrors to actively bounce that heat away, instead of depending upon removing of the carbon from the atmosphere, which could take quite a while. And some other interesting anecdote was that as we have been cleaning our atmosphere by getting rid of all of the pollution, we actually heated up more because we were not bouncing that radiation away. So in the, like the 1800s and 1900s, when everything was all nasty and smoggy and polluted, we actually were cooler. It's kind of funny.
I'm going to get.
Oh yeah, I see your listing there. My personal feeling about this is that, these large geoengineering projects, as I go back to what, Saul Griffith says, it's basically we have 80% of what we need right now to get the job done. If we divert resources to these large building floating mirrors in the atmosphere, they don't exist. It'll take quite a bit of research and development to make it happen. It'll be extraordinarily expensive. And I think our money is better spent, using what we have now to electrify and go to clean energy power supplies, and then get as far as we can. And then if we can't get far enough with those, bring it down as much as we can, and then start talking about these sorts of large scale
So
geoengineering projects.
This one is not a geoengineering one. It's not one of those ones in space or anywhere. It's actually very
Oh, okay.
localized. So
Is it-
I definitely recommend you check it out. They're actually doing some
Okay.
trials, combining it with farming to cool the surface of the ground right in the farms. And so.
Oh,
like,
yeah, absolutely. There's
Yeah.
some great agricultural solutions and forest solutions right now that need to be pursued as much as possible.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was just looking at the title, Mirrors for Earth's Energy Rebalancing.
They're small mirrors on the ground.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for
Okay.
hadn't thought of. I'd like to have you take note of the chat comments made by Lee Alley, converting his household to 90% reduction of carbon footprint. Stephanie also mentioned that the Navy has nuclear powered submarines. Duh, that could probably power cargo ships. And then Tiffany has a lot of thoughts about our current system of capitalism that's not going to help us. And make note of this, because all of these things are worthy of more time and more talking, but we're running out of time to talk. And Catherine puts in there that we need legislators strong enough to restrict bad practices, et cetera, but where are we going to find them? It's kind of hard. They're kind of in short supply, it seems sometimes. So let's see, Pat, did you have while people are looking through the chat and reading some of these other comments, did you have a question? I didn't want to ignore
Oh,
you.
I just wanted to make a comment that we were talking about using the waste. We're actually invested in a local company that uses farm waste, converts it into energy. I think it's called Farm Power.
Yeah.
And,
Farm power.
Yeah, we invested in that because it seemed like such a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah. Kevin Moss and his brother Daryl started that up, maybe 10, 15 years ago. I can't remember now, but anyway, they have a digester there in Rexville. They also have some up in Linden, some in California, down in the Tillamook area and whatnot, that basically use farm waste as well as some food waste from like the fish plants and whatnot, to generate methane, which then is converted to energy in their digesters. So yeah, local, great story.
Mhm.
So what was the name of that again? Farm
Power.
Okay, thank you. All right. So it is just a little after. Any other questions? This has been, are you waving goodbye, Judy? Or are you waiting? Do you have a question? She has one comment. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I have a hybrid car and I was thinking about getting an electrical car. And my son talked me out of it. He said, and I did read about this, that what it takes to create that electric car, it takes so long to make up for what you've done to manufacture the electric car. I don't know. I can't remember it. Anyway,
I think
it was kind
if
of
you're
like
going from a hybrid to an electric, it's less compelling. But if you're going from a fossil fuel internal combustion engine car to an electric, then that does not hold water. But I want to recommend that our next speaker in our clean energy series, and we posted the flyer for that, is hang on here, I've got it right here, on April 25th at 7 p.m. Michael Kintner-Meyer, who's a scientist at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, is going to talk about electrify everything we drive or ride in and talk about electric vehicles and all that stuff. And I imagine that he'll probably speak to that sort of question. So I invite you all to come to that. And the clean energy flyer, I see that Cindy has reposted that, and it has the Zoom link for that talk. I encourage you all to come hear him talk, because I hear he does a good job talking about electrifying transportation.
I'm looking forward to it, because if it's on the same caliber as the other three, it's going to be excellent and well worth the effort, the time watching. So I think we've pretty much gotten to the end of today. And I thank you.
I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. And if anyone
Yes,
ever
please
has any
do.
questions or
Yeah.
things they want to bounce off me, please feel free to send it to the email I'm going to put in there.
And I've tried to put the links into the flyer has been attached several times, but I know it's at the bottom, and you just want to get into the meeting, you're running late, you want to just get in or whatever, you don't get it, whatever. Anyway, it's been there, because I think this is so important. We need this information. We need to share this information. Thank you, Betty, so much for being with us this morning.
Sure,
Really,
I'm happy to come back anytime.
And I'm going to probably, let's see, any other two new messages.
Carol, can you remind us how to download the chat? Because there's so much in it.
No, I really can't. Let's see.
So
With
if
that-
you go
go
to the
ahead.
bottom of your screen under the chat, there should be 3 little dots down there. If you click the 3 dots, it should bring up a thing that says save chat.
Oh,
And then who knows where it goes. That's my problem. I've learned.
So where it goes is if under your documents folder,
Okay,
there should be a folder under documents called either Zoom or Zoom conferencing. And it goes in there and it'll have today's date on the file.
okay.
can't find
I'm
it.
enjoying being able to just copy one little piece of information and put it someplace, and I know where I can go back and look at it, because I've got it. Anyway, all these someone just said technology. Tiffany said, technology. It's so nice, but it can be so confusing at the same time. And we are not 8th graders who understand all of this perfectly. So thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate your attendance. Hopefully next week we'll have the issue chairs. If we don't, we're taking a vacation. But we're going to have so much that's going on, and there's going to be just a real push at that very end to notify legislators and push for the bills that we've been working on all session long. Then the final one, yay, is going to be right after the session closes, when we'll do our wrap up for what successes, what died, what's coming back next year, and that would be it. But see you next week then. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting